adoption of the minutes and the presentation. If at some point during the meeting we get a quorum, we'll stop, we'll vote on the minutes, and then move on from there. Our presenters today are Betsy Jivitan, former United States Attorney for the Northern District of West Virginia, and former Commissioner of the Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and she's also representing Uplift, West Virginia, and also Randy Bernard, First Assistant United States Attorney, Northern District of West Virginia. Folks, welcome and thank you for being here, and it's good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Floor is yours. You'll have to speak up.
I'm just going to quickly say thank you for having us here today. It's good to see a lot of these familiar faces. We're going to do a presentation on the reentry simulation, which is an interactive presentation that we have done. I started when we were in the U.S. Attorney's Office and continued it through correction. The U.S. Attorney's Office is still doing it. Now I'm doing it with Uplift, West Virginia and the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's actually being conducted throughout the country by various teams, but it's basically a tool by which we can raise awareness, break down barriers, sort of educate the public, law enforcement, and our community members as to what the barriers are that face people when they're re-entering our communities after a prison term. We have, if you go by the national standards, there 97% of the people that are incarcerated are coming home. So our communities benefit, our communities are safer, we all benefit when reentry is successful. So this is just an activity that we do, a presentation that we do to raise awareness, to help break down barriers, and to educate people about what is entailed when someone comes home from prison. So with that said, as an introduction, I'm going to introduce Randy Bernard. He's the First Assistant in the United States Attorney's Office. We worked for years together. So he's going to do the front half and tell you a little bit about the about recidivism and the simulation, and then I'll go into sort of the nuts and bolts. And if you want to try answering a few interactive questions to see how well you do as a returning citizen, we can do that as well. So thanks again for having us.
All right, thanks, Betsy, and everybody, thanks for having us. A little bit of background for myself. I've been an attorney 37 years, and first 10 years I was in private practice, and then I had my midlife crisis and became an FBI agent for 5.5 years. Then I returned to doing the lawyer work as an assistant United States attorney back in 2002. The one thing I'll say is during all that time, obviously, I think we in law enforcement sometimes build an opinion or form opinions about certain things, and crime, punishment, and recidivism, obviously, I think are up there among the important issues that we consider when we're doing our jobs. And the one thing I will say is over the years I've seen, and I've been in a criminal AUSA and obviously advocated for sentences, sometimes life imprisonment, all the way down to probation. And the one thing I will say is when it comes to recidivism and reducing that, it's become apparent that some of our programs are very important. Drug Corps is one, and this reentry program that began in 2016 and really began through the efforts of Betsy and some of our reentry individuals at the office. So it is near and dear to my heart, to Betsy's heart, that we think outside the box sometimes on not only doing our job, because there are certain individuals, certain crimes that require substantial sentences, but at the end of those sentences, we've got to do the job and also helping those individuals to reacquaint with society, because it's not just for their benefit, that's important, but it's also for the community's benefit as well. You see if I can get this to work. Not. Is it on? There we go.
I'm happy to do it.
I'll tell you what, I'm not. Now, before I begin my opening comments, I pose a question to all of you, and just to see off the top of your head what you think with respect to the average individual on a day-to-day basis, how many decisions do you think a person makes on any given day? Any guesses? All right, I'll throw it out there. 35,000 individual decisions. And that's not really hard to believe, because the very moment, if you're like me, as soon as I wake up, the decision is, do I hit the snooze button and how many times? And then what am I going to have for breakfast? What am I going to wear on the way to work? What route am I going to take? You know, am I going to use my turn signal? Am I going to speed, slow down? I mean, there's so many decisions on any given day that we make. Now, with respect to an incarcerated individual, does anybody know how many decisions those individuals make on any given day? Less, obviously. In fact, it's not that many. It's 100 decisions or less, and that's not surprising if you think about it. Their lives are so regimented. They're told basically when you're going to wake up, when lockdown ends, what you're going to wear, what time breakfast is, what you're going to do throughout the day, and then basically what time lockdown is. I mean, it's not hard to imagine that their lives are a lot different from folks that are on the outside. So, next slide. When somebody's released from prison, they're released from that 100 decisions, 100 basically decisions a day versus 35,000, and basically it's sensory overload. We know that from talking to individuals, but it's also common sense if you think about it. When I was with the FBI, I hated the run. It was a necessary thing. I still hate the run. I don't do it for exercise, and I won't do it for exercise. I just don't like it. But it would be like taking somebody like me who does not run, does not do that type of exercise, and scheduling them to run a marathon the very next day, or even a 5K. It would be a disaster. Let's face it, within probably 100 yards, I'd stop, pull out a cigars, and walk, and which is what I enjoy doing. So, and it's also, if you think about it, some of these individuals, as I said, have been incarcerated for 5, 10, some up to 30 years are being released now. If you think about it, it's like H.G. Wells and Time Machine, you know, going into the future. Think about 30 years ago, what our technology was like or not like. Think about today, how things have changed. I mean, this is pre 9/11. Some of these individuals went into jail. So you're now releasing people out into this world where we have Apple Watches, everything's done online, including, you know, job searches, interviews, as well as, I think in West Virginia, you can actually renew your driver's license online. I live in Ohio, and I don't know why we can't do that yet, but we don't. But so that's the type of situation a person is being released into without any safety net, so to speak. And that's why reentry and the reentry efforts are so important, to give them the tools and to introduce them to what's out there as far as getting their lives back in shape. A little bit of a history with the reentry. As I said, Betsy, it was Betsy's brainchild back in 2016. Reentry simulations first began in the Southern District of Alabama. U.S. Attorney down there created a simulation, and Betsy heard about it. They shared their kit and their materials with Betsy, and I think it was August of 2016 we did our first reentry simulation, and I can tell you it hasn't stopped since. It's grown exponentially in the number of simulations our office has done and has asked to do. In fact, the next slide you'll see our simulations have been done in the Department of Justice, the Great Hall of the Department of Justice, to our colleagues there at Capitol Hill in the Rayburn office building, to federal legislators. And we've been in Charleston, I believe, twice to the state capitol to provide simulations to legislators and staffers down there. And then throughout the district to federal, state, private entities, including colleges, universities. And the feedback, it's very interesting when these simulations, Betsy will probably talk about it, but the feedback is amazing when people say, I never realized how difficult it was. And before, I won't steal Betsy's thunder, but it is interesting. It's been gratifying to have this system in place and get the response. And it's growing geometrically. Next slide, please. In fact, it's grown so much that in our district, the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Northern District of West Virginia has worked with the Department of Justice to put together a training, I guess for lack of a better term, a toolkit for doing reentry simulations, where there's a video, which I think you'll see that, and there's also another video on actually running your own simulation. And next slide, please. What you go to the next one too. What has eventually happened is that toolkit and those efforts have now crossed into 42 separate states and into Canada, where our materials, our training video are being used by other U.S. attorneys' offices, other federal and state entities and private entities to put on these simulations. Next slide, please. And one of the more important areas, I think, in my opinion, that these simulations and these efforts are being focused upon is labor, diversion and job programs and agencies and employers, private employers, sort of educating them on why it's important to be involved with these efforts to re-employ individuals with felony records or recently incarcerated individuals who've just been released. It's important for a number of reasons. Well, obviously there's one important reason. There's financial incentives. There's tax credits and other reasons to financially do that for your business. More importantly, I think if you ask any of the employers that have been aggressive in this area, they'll say, hey, I've never had a better employee than this individual. They're motivated, and it does increase and improve relations with the community and the community itself. So I believe that's one of the main emphasis, the emphasis that we see with regard to reentry is our community and the effect they have upon our community. And so that's all well and good, but you're probably still wondering, what the heck is a reentry simulation? And for that, as I said, I'm not going to steal Betsy's thunder. I'm going to give her the floor now so she can explain exactly what the simulation is all about. And then if you have any questions after that, I'd be happy to answer or defer to Betsy for her to answer. Thank you.
All right, so as I said earlier, this is about raising awareness and breaking down barriers. And part of it is just so that we're changing the way, both from the worker's perspective and from the participant's perspective, changing a little bit about the way we view each other. So over the course of an hour and a half, participants experience the first month of post-release life. Each week takes place in a 15-minute segment, during which every reentrant has a different identity with a criminal history and some resources and materials which are given to you. And you must try and navigate your way through your new life through 15 or more different stations, which represent the places and entities to which someone has to report or be present as part of their supervised release while they're out. So this is a rough idea of how we set up the room. As you can see, these different stations where people have to report. We have, and pardon me if it's called the DMV in this slide, I'm not sure if it is. We try to refer to it as the ID station because we generally have people not happy at the ID station. Probation office, the court, the bank, employment, social services, the grocery store, everyone needs to buy food, a pawn shop, landlord so that people can pay their rent, transportation, health clinic, mandated treatment. So each station has random elements, and participants draw a card when they report to the station, and the random element, the card will produce a real life consequence or type of uncertainty that often occurs when someone appears at one of these stations. Are you getting confused yet? Okay, you're supposed to. Because this is what's overwhelming. We like creating that sense of, oh my God, what are you talking about? So people manning the stations also play different types of roles. Some of them are difficult social service providers. Some of them are very helpful. You're laughing when I say difficult. I had to stumble over that word. Because in real life, you can go to a service provider, you can go and someone will just treat you terribly, or you can go somewhere and someone is very helpful. So we want participants who are real, not returning citizens, people like us, to see what a difference that can make if the person at counseling and treatment or the person at the ID station is helpful and gives you a little bit of a positive interaction. That can make a big difference. Okay, so here we had it set up in Moundsville. We do simulations for law enforcement groups, education. This was one that we did for parole officers. We've done them for federal probation officers. We just finished one for state drug court probation officers, and we've been asked to do it again for all state probation officers, church groups, community groups, advocacy groups. So this is set up, everybody comes in and sits down, and then they will be given an identity. So I know these are hard to see, and I don't know if people have handouts or not, but everybody receives a different identity that defines them as a former prisoner returning to society with a life card. And that's your life card that explains your relevant criminal history, your current living situation, your employment, and the weekly responsibilities that you have to fulfill in order to avoid the risk of being sent back to prison, to undergo a revocation and being sent back. So the price a lot of times for non-compliance with these requirements is being sent back to prison on a technical violation. So this is a front and back picture of the identity card. These are some of the resources that are in different identity cards. So some participants start out with some money. If you've managed to have a job while you were in prison and save your money, you may have money in your packet. We require everybody to have a transportation ticket for every place they go in this simulation. And the reason we do that is partly because in West Virginia, transportation is always such an issue that we want people to be cognizant. Our reentrants are already cognizant of it, but we want our community members to be cognizant of how difficult it is for someone to get to a job application or to get to the DMV. 2 weeks ago, I took a prisoner from Mount Olive down to the DMV in my car so that he could get his driver's license. So we want people to know that transportation is always a big issue. So when you go to a table to get services during this simulation, you can't get the service if you don't have a transportation ticket. So this person has power tools that are valued at $100, which is something that he or she can pawn and get some money by going to the pawn shop. Again, he'll need a transportation ticket to get there. And the bottom three are the key points. And this is something that I know people have talked to you all about continuously, are the issues of IDs. So everyone has to have a state ID, if not a driver's license, a picture ID from the state, a social security card, and a birth certificate. Again, we require everybody when they're going to each booth and table to have all three of these, because we want people to recognize that a lot of people cannot get services if they can't produce one of these things. A lot of times for housing, for a job, for their license. So we want it stressed so that this is important and you have to have these. Some people will come out of prison with all those already, have already accomplished having all their IDs ready. Other people come out and they have nothing. All right, so I'll just read this. Here's a potential identity. This is Larry. So Larry has served 25 years in both state and federal prison for murder, felon in possession of a firearm, and a past drug conviction. He has a high school education. He has $200 that he saved in prison. He's working a job where he's getting $120 a week part-time at a fast food restaurant. And he is living with his significant other in rundown, I think it says rundown housing. So that would be the general outline of an identity that someone would get in their packet. Here's another one, Scott. You serve 10 years in federal prison for receipt of stolen property. I might add here that we have a simulation that we go for state people and we have one that we do for federal. So depending on the audience, we're either using state or federal crimes. And of course, some of them combine. You have a GED. Your money coming in is disability in the amount of $275 per month. And you will pick up your first check during the second week of your release. So you're not going to be able to come out and go and get that check right away. So we're talking already about planning. Your money on hand is $20. Your housing situation, again, is living with your significant other that you met as a prison pen pal, and your significant other's 2 children. So there are many more scenarios for our identities, and they include various levels of education, various types of housing, various issues of being employed, unemployed, struggling with addiction, struggling with other issues. There's a close-up. We really need to make this print bigger, of the general instructions for each participant. So I'm just going to read these so you'll have an idea in case any of you want to try and answer some of the questions. So every transportation, like I said, you have to pay when you get to a booth. They can be purchased for $1 each at the transportation table. You have to have a minimum of 5 tickets. If you run out of tickets, you can get 1 free ticket, but you can't even go to the transportation office to get free tickets if you don't have that ticket. Plasma at the plasma table can be donated twice a week. You can go to the plasma table and draw a card. If your card says you can give plasma, you can get $25. You may draw a card that says, sorry, you just got a tattoo. You're not allowed to give plasma. So you've wasted a transportation ticket on going to try and give plasma. You may have items in your packet you can pawn or sell. Everybody has to purchase food every week. You would be amazed at the number of people after the first week we say who bought food? No one. Then after the second week, who bought food? No one. Because there's so much to do that they don't think to go buy food. So, we have a lot of people simulatingly dropping dead because they don't eat. You have to see your probation officer during the first and third weeks. You have to pay rent unless you're living with your parents. You have to pay, some people have to pay restitution, student loans, traffic citation, and child support. You have to go to the courthouse to do that. And you have to do a urinalysis. So here are 2 examples of the life card. So if you get a life card, your weeks are set out in the columns there. If there's a blackout there, then you don't have to do that during that week. But you can tell from the person, so for the first life card, the first week, the person does not have to go to treatment, but that person, the first week, needs to go to probation, pay $30 a month, buy food for $25 a month, pay rent and utilities, $400 a month. That's a kicker for someone on their first week out. Go get their urinalysis. Urinalysis tests are also weighted. You go to get your urinalysis, you draw a card. Those cards are weighted statistically so that some are positive and some are negative based on actual statistics. And a lot of people are going to AA or NA mandated treatment as part of their requirements. So you have to go to probation. You have to buy food. You can do this using money, food stamps. There's also a food bank. The life card includes requirements as to how often you must see the PO or counseling, and plasma, and the other things that we just discussed. So we also require everybody in the simulation to go through a urinalysis. The probation officer requires them to test periodically. Some of the participants have to test every other week. I think a few of the crimes that we have to test week. The good news for participants is that in the simulation, it's a lot less intrusive than it is in real life. In our simulation, you draw a card and you get either a positive or negative. And depending on if your urinalysis is positive, then you probably won't get your job and you probably will lose that job. And so you're not going to have your employment coming in. And this is just, it's sort of like it snowballs, and we want people participating to realize what can happen if one thing goes wrong. So in between each week segment, reentrants return to their housing, which can be their home, halfway house if you're in the federal system, homeless shelter, or jail, depending on how successful you've been in satisfying your conditions. We have monitors and officers that come and check the life cards to see how well you're doing and assess your level of compliance. So if we check the life card and you haven't made it, that monitor can put you right in jail for non-compliance. Yes, we do have a mock jail as part of the simulation, and quite a few wardens, police chiefs, and high-ranking law enforcement officers end up in jail during the simulations. So the wild card. One of the things we did when we started this simulation was we took it at first into the federal prisons, and then we took it into some of our state institutions as well. And we wanted to get feedback from people who were actually living this life. So we, on our teams inside, asked people, if you're back in here because you've been revoked, we really want you on our team. We want you to tell what happened and help us come up with scenarios that the public will like to hear. So we did a scenario, and we were doing a simulation inside once, and a couple of the guys said to us, you don't have a chance for us to go back and, let me back up. A lot of times some things will happen to us that we're not expecting, and they would start telling us stories. One of which was our babysitter canceled the first day I was home, and I had to take my child with me while I went searching for a job. So we started putting wild cards in the simulation, which is something we do that maybe now other U.S. attorneys' offices are doing it, I don't know. But it's basically, life throws us a curveball. Every week, one of us gets a curveball, and we want reentrants to realize what can happen. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes it's, hey, your grandmother sent you $25 for your birthday. Other times it's, you got a speeding ticket. You need to report to your probation officer. Other times it's, you were at a friend's house and two people got in a fight and the police were called. Now you've got to go to your probation officer and report your contact with the police. A lot of people don't realize how you as a witness to an occurrence, if you have contact with police officers, you need to report. So those wild cards are in there, and they represent things that you're not expecting. Whether you need a winter coat, you get a flat tire, that's in there. The babysitter one is one of our favorites, and I will not lie. I hand those wild cards out to people that I want to have a particularly difficult time going through the simulation to see how hard it really is. So I've been known to stack the deck and hand those babies out to people that I think really need to see what it's like. And I did give them to judges at our last simulation. All the judges got babies, and they did really well with them. So part of what you have to do when you have the baby, you have to take that baby to the church and change the diaper and sit down and feed it. And the premise there is, if you're taking care of your child, that's taking time out of your week. You only have 15 minutes to do everything. So you need to sit at the church for 3 minutes, feed that baby and change the diaper. So we have a lot of fun with that. So speaking of real life scenarios, this is what I was getting to before. Our participants inside told us, this is all well and good, but you haven't factored in that some of us, when everything goes wrong, we feel like we have no choice but to commit another crime. And that's what we're talking about. The recidivism rate being so high on the first months after release is because there is this feeling of, I'm not sure what to do, so maybe I need to go try and commit a crime if I'm at my wit's end. The other side of that is something Randy brought up, is that we all know that everybody coming out of prison isn't necessarily into trying to become a productive citizen. And some people are going back to a life of crime just because they can, or they don't think they're going to get caught. But these are chance cards. So we implemented a chance table based on, this was guys at USP Hazelton that told us, you know, if your back's against the wall, you feel like you have no choice but to commit a crime. And it was hard for us as prosecutors to say, okay, we're going to factor in here and let you guys commit crimes when you get out. But that's a reality of being out. This is something, if you feel like you have no other choice, you're going to commit a crime. So you can go to the chance table and you can receive stolen property, do a drug deal. I think the other one is rob a bank. I'm not sure, but there are 3 choices there. Again, you draw a card. Sometimes you get away with it. And other times you get caught and you're right back in jail. And those cards are also weighted on recidivism statistics. So everything that is weighted on the tables is done pursuant to real life statistics. All right, who's brave enough to try one? All right, come on. Let's try it anyway. Here's your identity. And you can keep it to yourself and then I'll quiz you afterward. So your name is Rose. You served 5 years in federal prison for possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance. Your education is a high school dropout. Your money on hand is $30. You are unemployed. Your housing situation is you are living with a significant other and the significant other's 2 children. So you see by the life card that for your first week, you have to report to treatment, buy food, get a urinalysis, go to an AA meeting, and go to your GED class. So let's see what you've got on hand in your packet. You have $30. But you also have power tools and jewelry worth $400. And you have 6 transportation tickets. So, all right. These are the options of where you can go when you first hit the street. You can go look for a job. You can go get your IDs because you don't have any IDs. You can take your stuff to the pawn shop, or you can go get some transportation tickets. All right. Are we brave enough to do a show of hands? Who would go look for a job first? No one. Okay. Who would go get their IDs first? Yes. Congratulations. You have all 3 of your forms of identification, but that cost you $30. It cost you everything you had. So you people who went to get your IDs, you're still a little bit ahead of the game. Anybody would have gone to the pawn shop? You can admit it now. Okay. Here's what they would tell you at the pawn shop. And that happens. That happens all the time. The chief of police of Wheeling robbed the bank when he went there. So, and it's fun and it's supposed to be fun and everybody's supposed to laugh, but nobody leaves not recognizing what the challenges are.
You still have to have an ID though.
Bingo. You cannot pawn your items until you have identification. So you have wasted a transportation ticket and you still have to, you've wasted your time as well. What about going to buy more transportation tickets? Anybody put that on there? Okay. All right. So we in the next year. All right. So you were able, let's move ahead. You were able to pawn, let's try A. You were able to pawn your 400, let's back, I'm gonna back up. How many people on week 2, go ahead, would now go to the pawn shop if you have your IDs? You were able to pawn your $400 worth of items for $200. And now you're down 2 transportation tickets because you've used 1 for your IDs and 2 for the pawn shop. All right, how many people reported to their probation officer? Next. Okay, here's your problem. Your probation visit costs $15, which you don't have because you spent all your money on your IDs. So you will have to come back when you have money, and you've also wasted a transportation ticket. So you see where it's going? It's like you can't win, and it's sort of set up for, man, this is frustrating. How about people looking for jobs? Do we have any job seekers out here? You're job searched and you were able to find a part-time fast food position for $12 an hour. You can start right away and you'll be working the next 3 days in a row. But since you had to ride the bus every day to work, you're going to be down 3 transportation tickets at the end of the week. The employment table, people report to the employment table. You have to sit at the employment table if you're part-time for 3 minutes, if you're full-time for 7 minutes, because that takes time out of your work. You use up your transportation tickets. So then that's to show learning to budget time. If you're working, you still have to get to your probation office. You still have to do all the other requirements. But I'll say D, how many people would have at this point decided to buy more transportation tickets? I'll just add in here that we usually have people walking around with counterfeit transportation tickets and counterfeit IDs, and we do have ways of finding them. And those people end up in jail too. All right, next week. All right, so your requirement was to go to your NA meeting. Probation, job, or transportation. How many people would take the opportunity to go to the NA meeting, which is free? Required, it's mandated. All right. If you attend your mandated meeting, your probation officer is going to look at it as what? As you're making an effort. If you blow it off, it doesn't look good for you. This the first time something else doesn't go right. But you've got to use a transportation ticket to get there and have IDs. Your probation officer doesn't, just because your life card says you have to see your probation officer doesn't necessarily mean you can blow it off that week. A probation officer can wander around and call you in anytime, which is also happens in real life. So your probation officer on this one, let's say the card is probation officer calls you in, you draw a card, he makes you take a UA. You take a UA, that's a flip of a coin, could be a positive or a negative. If you have not gone to work yet, if you are going to work from last week, you now have $150. So this is getting you farther along in terms of going to probation and paying the fee, purchasing transportation tickets. And what we find, what we find in this simulation is always that the people who are working, even part-time jobs, just like in real life, recidivate less than the people that don't have jobs. Of course, finding a job, there are a lot of barriers, and a part-time job at a fast food restaurant a lot of times won't support somebody who needs to pay rent and child support and everything else. Like I said before, we will always ask at the end of the week, how many people ate this week? A lot of times people forget to eat. Counseling. If you miss any of, if we don't kick you out we don't put you back in jail for not eating, although we have had some people say, at least if I go to jail, I'll get food. Not sure that's really, I won't comment. But you can see how quickly things begin to pile up for someone who's reintegrating. And that's what we're trying to do. From the beginning, these individuals are going from making less than 100 decisions to making 35,000. And of course, it's not that realistic because the people going through the simulation can make decisions and do make decisions. So, but it provides an insight into why so many people may fail when they come out. And like I said, we've had multiple wardens that have gone through it, correctional staff that have been incarcerated by the second week. We've had wardens that will sit there and say, I've heard them say to inmates, man, now I see what you're talking about how hard it is, about what the challenge is. So we see that some of the challenges, which, you know, I know you all hear plenty about, are employment, the IDs, the mental and physical health of people coming out of prison, transportation issues, people that have minor children, housing. So we know that the rearrest rate is highest in the months immediately following a release. And while this is fun and it's challenging and people, you know, are laughing and we're having a good time, it does give an insight. One of the things that we did was a training video while I was commissioner. We were asked by the Department of Justice to do a training video to be used by the Department of Justice, and we did it at St. Mary's. So I just want to show you a clip because inmates have taken real ownership in the federal facilities we worked in, and it was USP Hazleton, USP Gilmer, FCI McDowell, FCI Hazleton, FCI Morgantown, Huttonsville, St. Mary's, Denmark. Inmates have taken real ownership of this because they are using it as a chance to mentor younger inmates and giving them that lesson of you don't want to be coming back repeatedly like we have been. So I just want to show you this clip because I think it gives an idea of how engaged this inmate population is, and to say that most of the people that are talking in this video are now out and they're part of teams that are presenting reentry simulations to the public with me now.
The far greater numbers of people who are being incarcerated for parole violations are people that are being incarcerated for technical violation, or not showing up regularly at the parole office, or not going to their treatment. By going through the simulation, someone in the community can get a little bit of a realization for the challenges and the obstacles that face people as they're trying to navigate through the system.
It's a great opportunity to introduce the reentry simulation as wide as we can. I think the more people understand just how difficult it is when the returning citizen is trying to meet our requirements, it's to help us to be empathetic about the needs and can help them to be successful in reentering our communities.
The standard exercise consists of 13 stations representing the places a returning citizen must navigate in order to be successful. You can craft the stations to your specific area, but examples include identification, probation, super center and bank, court, employment, a GED program and career center, social services, a church and food bank, quick loan and pawn shop, transit and rent, health clinic, treatment and counseling, and a plasma bank. The participants receive a life card that contains an identity including a criminal background, current living condition, current job situation, and the order in which the task must be accomplished each week. 99% of the people who are incarcerated across the country are coming home. They're going to be our neighbors. Their children are going to be in school with our children. And if we don't prepare them for coming out and becoming productive citizens, then the community loses out as well.
You need the cooperation and the support of the management team at the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's foremost, because you're going to need resources like materials from the U.S. Attorney's Office. You need office volunteers to participate as well. You need a whole network of people working together to have a successful reentry simulation. Make sure you check our life cards at the end of each week. A check mark on the life card represents a positive interaction or completion of tasks, and an X represents a negative interaction or signifies a failure to complete.
These exercises with the community are critical to getting the buy-in of the people who may be interacting with a reentered citizen in any number of ways.
What I wanted you to do is really get a visual for where everybody's ended up during this simulation. We got our homeless shelter over here. That's a pretty significant number of people who are homeless. Halfway house, a little bit smaller. Our jail represent the true statistics. which are that 70% of individuals that are released are rearrested in the first 3 years.
2 federal judges are sitting in that jail, by the way.
With a smaller group like you all, a larger group, the statistics always play out is 70% of our individuals are back in jail. We have quite a few returning citizens that are sitting at these tables. Without them, we truly would not be able to do this. If you have questions for them about what they walked through, we'll be happy to answer any of that.
The things that you realized here today, many of you are in positions that you can actually affect those things. And you're reducing some hurdles if we can figure out cheap, effective ways of impacting recidivism that doesn't really take much effort.
It's really important for people to think that this just isn't a 3 or 5 year problem. This is a lifetime problem for many individuals.
It was a great experience. It was an educational experience, and it was a really hands-on experience. I think it would certainly make me more cognizant of things that may be taken for granted in court, and make judicial officers and others that participate in the court process more aware of what is actually taking place after the court processes.
In the black party, judging where to go for treatment during week 1, or if you have to do treatment week 1, it'll be empty. You've got a black box there, you don't have to worry about it. There's no order to this. When you determine what order you want to go, what's most important.
We have found that the best way to do it in the prison is to have the population take ownership of the simulation themselves. There's much more buy-in from the population if inmates that have credibility are running it and are manning it. In fact, a lot of the scenarios that are in the simulation are ones that were actually given to us by inmates across the state to actually experience.
Folks are returning to the community and they experience these obstacles and barriers on a day-to-day basis and return due to these obstacles and barriers.
Even more important is holding simulations inside the prison in order to give those who are about to rejoin society a realistic glimpse into what challenges await them on the outside.
I volunteered to be a monitor and do the program because I believe in it. I believe in re-entry. I believe that as a guy that's been locked up now 19 years, that it's going to benefit me. I need to know how to navigate through life. I need to know the frustrations that's going to come. It's so important that we educate people, give them the necessary tools to be successful, because these guys are going out to be somebody's danger.
I think that the reentry simulation process is very beneficial because I didn't realize there was going to be so many hurdles, that I had to cross. At every step of the way, I was reminded of how frustrating it can be, or how I may not have the resources in order to get to the next place that I need to be.
Week 1, when I got my ID, first and foremost, I had $20 to my name. So it cost me $15 to get my ID. It left me $5, so I figured I'd probably better do my year analysis. And I went and done it, it cost another $5. So that left me with $0. I went to the bank and lost another bus pass. Now I'm left with none of those. And I didn't pass my year analysis. So it was a pretty bad week.
I think it was beneficial because it's preparing me now to start thinking about things I need to start getting in line.
At the end of the session, we did a question and answering session with the guys, and a lot of them said it was eye-opening. Only way you're gonna change what people do when you change what they know. One of the guys asked, how many guys want to come back to jail? Nobody raised their hand. So what's wrong? What's wrong? Why are they coming back to jail if they don't want to?
It's important for people to understand that public safety has a reentry component, and we need to knock down those hurdles and barriers in our communities right now that are out there, that we can help these people come back into our communities and successfully re-enter.
My advice would be don't be intimidated. It looks like a large undertaking, and it can be, but it becomes simpler the more that you conduct, and the benefits outweigh any challenges.
So I can't wait till the gates open for me to start getting my ducks in a row and maybe get my ID, Social Security card, birth certificate, things like that in order, because if I wait till the last minute, then I feel like the potential to fail is higher. A lot of the things that I haven't been thinking about, I'm gonna start thinking about after today, as I'm getting closer to parole.
Investment in reentry is a proven method for reducing the recidivism and keeping our communities safer. I'm United States Attorney Bill Powell in the Northern District of West Virginia. For many years, the Department of Justice has successfully executed reentry programs that have significantly reduced recidivism. One such program is a reentry simulation, which my district conducts on a regular basis with great results. The simulation is a useful tool preparing people who are incarcerated for the challenges that they will face once they are released. But it's also an eye-opening experience for members of the community, from judges, probation officers, and law enforcement, to employers, students, and clergy, anyone who could ultimately support the success of a reentering citizen. I urge you to conduct this valuable exercise in your district.
So that's just a little insight into what we've been doing with the reentry simulation. I think the takeaway is that we can break down barriers. We can learn to look at each other differently. That judging a person by what they did in the past is different than judging them from here on out. And that, let's not judge people on their past mistakes, but on their future accomplishments. Like I said, a lot of these individuals that are in this film are now out. We have a great team. I think we have a really good team of presenters, because up here and really throughout the northern half of the state when we do it, and even when we came to Charleston, we're able to put someone at a table. Every table is able to be manned by someone who has actually walked that walk. And that's helpful. So, I mean, I guess I hope the message is that by working collaboratively and engaging community stakeholders and raising awareness, we can make our communities better places, because we have an obligation. We have an obligation to ourselves. We have an obligation to these men and women that are coming out, in many cases, and probably the majority of cases, ready to try and become productive citizens and navigate the challenges in our communities. And if this provides some insight to community stakeholders, then it's doing its job. And I know it definitely provides some insight to people who are incarcerated, who may not yet be on that cycle of in and out and in and out. So I want to thank you very much for your attention and your interest in this. It's a critically important aspect of corrections, of the criminal justice system, and of being good, productive community members. So thank you for your support, and we'll be happy to take questions. We put this simulation on all over the state for any group. You can get in touch with the U.S. Attorney's Office or with Uplift West Virginia, and we will come to you with all the equipment and have at it. It's fun and educational. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jividen and Ms. Bernal. We're going to have some time for a few questions. I want to remind the committee that we need to stay within the parameters of this particular presentation. So if you have questions about the needs of our presenters, we'll try to get the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jividen, appreciate you being here today. As I watched the video, it's clearly a few years old. So help me understand a little bit of, is this been put on by Uplift or the U.S. Attorney's Office, or just kind of give me a little bit of a history of when this started and really who, and maybe explain the partnership a little bit better to me so that I understand.
So the partnership is real. The reentry simulation started, I guess, reentry became a priority for U.S. attorneys' offices back when I was still in the U.S. attorney's office. Every U.S. attorney's office had to have a designated reentry coordinator. That's how this sort of started as far as U.S. attorney's offices becoming interested in reentry. I took the reentry coordinator's job mainly because I had so many people bag out when I was asking them to do it. So as I said, you know, I'm a mother. I know how to be a martyr. So I said, fine, I'll just do it myself. But for someone who's been a prosecutor, the opportunity to walk into a facility and see men and women, you know, we see them on their worst day. We see them the day they're convicted, the day they're sentencing. And a lot of times in our profession, we lose sight of what happens to them afterward. And so this reentry gave us the opportunity to do that. So I know I'm sort of getting off topic, but that's what started the Northern District with this very big focus on reentry. And because we had so many federal facilities, so many federal inmates within the Northern District, that we started going into facilities. And the video was actually done, hasn't been all that long ago. Probably four or 5 years ago.
So the 29.3 number that is on screen, is that number was from a few years ago? Is that still an accurate number? Do we know what the accurate or the current recidivism rate is?
Honestly, I do not. I took that from an annual report and I do not know what the current rate is. I do know that in West Virginia right now, you have about maybe 3,400 people on parole right now who are releasing out.
And the reason I asked the question is because I believe it used that 29.3% number in the actual video. And with these simulated programs that you have, I was curious as to what the recidivism rate is to show some success or you know, have some numbers back the success of the program.
So we started out when I was doing it using federal numbers, and right now we're using federal numbers again. So when we weight the statistics at the table, we're more like 2/3, like we're not using that precise 29.3% when we do a weighted table. Does that answer your question?
And so I'm assuming then that the U.S. Attorney's Office is who funds this program. Is that?
We don't really, I mean, it's pretty much, they fund it in terms of travel, but the people that do it for Uplift, we all do it volunteer. It is all volunteer. The teams that, the former offenders that come, and I've taken them to Fairmont, to Charleston. I have a deal with my wheeling team that every time we do a simulation, one of the individuals who runs a recovery home and I take them out to dinner. I mean, that's, you know, on our dime.
So I'm, you know, I'm just asking anything. So there is no funding request of the state or no foreseeable, correct?
No. No, it's a service.
You mentioned the state ID. How difficult is that for an inmate, someone that's about to go through the reentry process? How the DMV requires affidavits of residency? And the reason I ask the question is that in Martinsburg, the rescue mission is having some issues with helping folks. That's kind of a different type of reentry. It's not from an incarceration, but from being like a rescue mission. So they're struggling to jump through some of the hoops that are required by the DMV, and I just like for you to talk about that a little bit if you can, as it relates to those that are about to go through the reentry process.
So IDs are a recurring problem. And I do know that the legislature recently passed legislation that extended the use of the prison ID that people are released with, so that ID is supposed to be valid as a state ID for a longer period to enable people to go and get their state ID quicker. I think it might have started out at 30 and I think it's now 90. Don't quote me on that. We also put on the back of that ID that this is a valid state ID because no matter what, you still have banks that say this is not an ID. So yes, there is a problem. Transportation is one problem for people getting to the DMV to get IDs. Now, and I don't know the current status, now that you can renew your license online, whether or not the DMV will accept a place of incarceration as an address, I don't know. Whether or not somebody can use their former address, because a lot of people don't have a former address to use. I know in Maryland, when we were doing this with FCI Cumberland, the state of Maryland would take FCI Cumberland address as a valid address for obtaining a driver's license. So that may be an issue. Honestly, I don't know the status of that right now with the DMV.
The stat of the 35,000 decisions for all of us in this room and out in the general public, as opposed to 100 decisions for those that are incarcerated. That really puts it in perspective as to how regimented or routine these folks are in. What other aspects of life in a being incarcerated affect re-entry and kind of getting reacclimated to society within a prison?
I think that's probably the biggest, because life is all about making decisions and making choices. And, also personal relationships, frustration levels, just navigating life, which I think the process of decision-making is what falls, that was a bad decision to react that way. That was not that good a decision. I would say, maybe there's, I'm sure there are people that have differing viewpoints on that, and really people that are walking that life would probably be able to tell you dozens of more issues.
Those that are in for a short amount of time, they're still in facilities with violent criminals, and I'm sure that weighs on and affects their life and kind of the atmosphere that they're in. And when they go to reentry, they're kind of leaving a facility where they're surrounded by violent criminals and putting them back out in society where very different scenario. Talk a little bit about that, and then also conditions in which that inmates are living in, and how does that affect their reentry as well?
Well, I'm just gonna address part of that, which is, the more that somebody can transition, I think theoretically, I'm just giving you a theoretical answer, the more that someone can transition, there are a lot of people that are walking out the doors. This is federal and state, but more state, not just West Virginia, across the country, that are walking out of a maximum security facility right into society. If there's a way to step down, if there's a way to do, halfway house systems like the federal government has, where you are sort of have the work release scenario, where you have 1 foot in the community, but you're still, you still have some sort of supervision. I think that helps in the transition.
And obviously you were a commissioner for a number of years. I mean, what were the conditions like then, and how did that affect inmates and their reentry and their life and stuff? Can you talk about the conditions while you were the commissioner and how that related to the inmates? I mean, there were reports of water issues, sewer issues, all this.
To my vice chair.
The co-chair, go ahead.
To the co-chair, let me say that we're going to keep these questions tailored for this presentation. We're not going to go back into time, still passion. This is the time, it's not time or place for that conversation. It was given, I'm going to instruct you not to answer the questions about your time as commissioner.
Mr. Superintendent, if there's an appropriate time for this committee or another legislative committee Is that something that you would be willing to participate and talk about your tenure, at corrections as the commissioner?
Again, co-chair, this is not the time for this question. We can reach out to her another time, not during this meeting.
I'm thinking this is an appropriate question.
I'm the instructor, not the answer.
You do that. I think people like being surveyed.
Anyone else have any questions? Any other business to bring before the committee? Not, I'll look to my co-chair for the motion.
Chairman, we've been here.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Yeah.